Maria Santos had been a court interpreter for 3 years. She was quiet, professional, invisible to most people in the court. When the judge asked her to state her qualifications for the record, everyone expected the usual response. Instead, she leaned into the microphone and whispered 3 words that caused the federal marshals to reach for their walkie-talkies and the defense lawyer to go white in the face. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoyed this story about those who serve in silence, please consider subscribing for more tales of unsung heroes. The Theodore Levin Federal Building stood as a monument to American justice in downtown Detroit, its imposing granite facade housing one of the most important federal district courts in the Midwest. The building's 27 stories contained courtrooms where some of the nation's most significant legal proceedings took place, from complex white-collar crime cases to high-stakes terrorism trials that shaped national security policy. For the past 3 years, Maria Santos had been a familiar presence in the building's translator pool, providing interpretation services for defendants and witnesses who required assistance with English-language proceedings. To the judges, attorneys, and court staff who saw her regularly, Maria appeared to be exactly what her credentials suggested: a skilled linguist with advanced degrees in international relations and Middle Eastern studies who had transitioned to court work after completing her academic training. Maria's background, according to her official court personnel file, included a master's degree in Arabic and Persian languages from Georgetown University, certification in legal translation from the American Translators Association, and 3 years of experience providing interpretation services in federal courts across multiple jurisdictions. Her language skills were exceptional, encompassing not only modern Standard Arabic, but also regional dialects from across the Middle East and North Africa. Her approach to court interpretation was methodical and professional in ways that distinguished her from many of her colleagues in the translator pool. While other interpreters might provide basic translation services, Maria demonstrated nuanced understanding of legal terminology, cultural context, and technical language that suggested either exceptional academic preparation or experience that went beyond standard linguistic training. What none of Maria's colleagues or the court officials who worked with her knew was that her assignment to the Detroit Federal Courthouse was not a career transition from academic work, but rather a carefully orchestrated undercover operation conducted by one of America's most secretive federal agencies. Maria Santos was not just a court interpreter, she was Special Agent Maria Santos, a 15-year veteran of the CIA's Directorate of Operations with extensive experience in counterterrorism and Middle Eastern intelligence operations. Maria's real background included covert assignments in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Libya, where she had operated under various cover identities to gather intelligence about terrorist networks, weapons trafficking operations, and foreign intelligence services targeting American interests. Her linguistic abilities, which seemed impressive for an academic translator, were actually the result of years of operational experience in Arabic-speaking countries where perfect fluency was essential for survival. The decision to place Maria in an undercover assignment at the Detroit Federal Courthouse had been made at the highest levels of the intelligence community, based on information indicating that terrorist networks were using the American legal system to communicate with operatives, coordinate activities, and gather intelligence about federal law enforcement capabilities. Maria's mission was to monitor proceedings involving defendants with suspected ties to international terrorism, identify potential security threats that might emerge during trials, and gather intelligence about terrorist networks that might be revealed through testimony, evidence, or communications intercepted during legal proceedings. Her position as a court interpreter provided perfect cover for her actual purpose, allowing her to access sensitive information while appearing to conduct routine translation work. The sophisticated nature of Maria's cover identity required her to actually perform court interpretation at an expert level, which meant she had undergone intensive training in legal procedures, courtroom protocols, and federal rules of evidence to ensure that her cover identity would withstand scrutiny from experienced attorneys and federal judges. For 3 years, Maria had successfully maintained her dual role without incident. She had provided intelligence reports that contributed to several successful counterterrorism operations, identified potential security threats that had been neutralized before they could develop into active plots, and gathered information about terrorist financing networks that had led to significant prosecutions. Maria's daily routine at the courthouse provided ideal cover for her intelligence-gathering activities. The constant flow of defendants with international connections gave her access to individuals and information of intelligence interest, while her position as an interpreter allowed her to monitor communications and testimony that might reveal terrorist activities or foreign intelligence operations. The case that would ultimately expose Maria's true identity began as what appeared to be a routine terrorism prosecution. The United States government had filed charges against Ahmed Hassan, a naturalized American citizen accused of providing material support to terrorist organizations and conspiring to commit acts of terrorism within the United States. Hassan's case was significant, not just because of the serious charges involved, but because of intelligence suggesting that he was part of a larger network that had been operating undetected in American cities for several years. The FBI's investigation had revealed connections to known terrorist organizations, evidence of sophisticated planning for potential attacks, and communications with foreign operatives that indicated ongoing threats to national security. The trial proceedings had been underway for 6 weeks, with prosecutors presenting evidence that included intercepted communications, financial records, witness testimony, and surveillance materials that painted a picture of a well-organized conspiracy with international connections. Hassan's defense team had challenged the government's evidence on procedural grounds while arguing that their client was a victim of mistaken identity and overzealous prosecution. Maria had been assigned to provide interpretation services for Hassan and several witnesses who required assistance with English language proceedings. Her work had involved translating complex legal arguments, technical evidence, and testimony that required precise understanding of both legal terminology and the cultural context of communications that had been intercepted by intelligence agencies. Throughout the trial, Maria's interpretation work had been professional and accurate, drawing no particular attention from the court or the attorneys involved in the case. To outside observers, she appeared to be conducting routine translation services, but her intelligence training allowed her to identify patterns and connections in the testimony that were not apparent to others in the courtroom. The crisis that would reveal Maria's true identity began during the testimony of a key government witness, a former associate of Hassan, who had agreed to cooperate with federal authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. The witness was providing detailed information about Hassan's activities, including descriptions of meetings, plans, and communications that formed the core of the government's case. As the witness testified about coded communications and operational planning, Maria noticed that Hassan was reacting to specific details in ways that suggested the witness was providing accurate information about activities that Hassan had believed were secret. Hassan's body language and facial expressions indicated recognition of events and individuals that he had not expected to be exposed during the trial. More significantly, Maria observed Hassan attempting to communicate with individuals in the courtroom gallery, using subtle hand signals and facial expressions that appeared to be a form of nonverbal communication designed to convey information without detection by court security. Her intelligence training allowed her to recognize these signals as operational communications that could indicate ongoing terrorist activities. The situation escalated when Maria noticed that one of the individuals in the gallery was responding to Hassan's signals with communications of his own, suggesting a level of coordination that went beyond normal family or friend support for a defendant. The individual's responses indicated that he understood Hassan's signals and was providing information in return. Maria's analysis of the nonverbal communications suggested that Hassan and his associate were discussing potential responses to the witness testimony, including what appeared to be contingency plans for dealing with the information that was being revealed during the trial. The communications had operational characteristics that indicated active planning rather than passive observation of legal proceedings. The realization that she was witnessing active terrorist coordination in a federal courtroom created a complex operational challenge for Maria. Standard court interpretation protocols required her to focus on translating spoken communications without involving herself in other aspects of the proceedings, but her intelligence training told her that immediate action was necessary to prevent potential threats to national security. As the morning session continued, Maria gathered additional evidence that Hassan and his associates were using the trial proceedings as an opportunity to coordinate activities and share information about federal law enforcement capabilities. The sophistication of their communication methods and the operational nature of their discussions suggested that they represented an active threat that required immediate federal response. During a brief recess, Maria made a decision that would expose her undercover identity but potentially prevent a terrorist attack that could cost lives. She approached the federal marshals responsible for courtroom security and identified herself using credentials that immediately marked her as something other than a routine court employee. The response to Maria's identification was swift and professional. Senior FBI officials were contacted, additional security personnel were deployed to the courthouse, and surveillance was initiated on individuals who had been identified as potential associates of Hassan's network. The coordinated response reflected the seriousness of the threat that Maria had identified. However, the involvement of federal agents and the obvious increase in security measures began to raise questions among court personnel about how a routine terrorism trial had escalated to require such extensive federal law enforcement response. The sophisticated coordination between Maria and the responding agents suggested preparation and authority that went beyond standard court security procedures. When the trial resumed after lunch, Judge Patricia Williams noticed that the atmosphere in her courtroom had changed significantly. Additional federal marshals were present. Several individuals who had been in the gallery during the morning session were no longer present, and the court interpreter, who had been working quietly for weeks, was now the focus of obvious attention from federal law enforcement personnel. The formal revelation of Maria's true identity came when Judge Williams called both legal teams to a sidebar conference and asked direct questions about the increased security presence and the apparent federal law enforcement interest in what had been a routine court proceeding. The government's response revealed that Agent Santos had identified active threats that required immediate intervention. The disclosure that Maria Santos was an active CIA operative who had been conducting an undercover operation in the federal courthouse sent shockwaves through the legal community and had immediate implications for the Hassan trial. Defense attorneys argued that the use of intelligence operatives in court proceedings violated their clients' constitutional rights, while prosecutors maintained that Agent Santos had prevented terrorist activities that could have threatened public safety. Judge Williams' decision to continue the trial while addressing the constitutional issues raised by Maria's undercover role required careful balancing of national security concerns with due process requirements. Her ruling established precedents for how intelligence operations could be conducted in federal courtrooms while maintaining the integrity of legal proceedings. The intelligence gathered through Maria's undercover operation proved to be extraordinarily valuable for understanding the scope and sophistication of Hassan's terrorist network. Her identification of the communication methods being used by the conspirators led to additional arrests and the disruption of planned attacks that could have resulted in significant casualties. Maria's 3 years of undercover work at the Detroit Federal Courthouse had successfully identified numerous security threats and contributed to intelligence operations that enhanced federal law enforcement capabilities against terrorist networks operating within the United States. Her ability to maintain cover while gathering critical intelligence had proven the value of placing experienced operatives in positions where they could monitor potential threats. The revelation of Maria's true identity also highlighted the complex intersection between intelligence operations and the American legal system, demonstrating how national security considerations sometimes required unconventional approaches to gathering information about threats to public safety. For Maria, the exposure of her cover identity marked the end of one of her most successful long-term operations and the beginning of new assignments that would utilize her experience in both intelligence gathering and legal procedures. Her success in the Detroit courthouse had proven that effective counterterrorism work could be conducted through careful positioning of assets in strategic locations. The court personnel who had worked with Maria during her 3 years as an interpreter gained new understanding of the hidden layers of protection that safeguarded American legal institutions and the dedication of intelligence professionals who served without recognition in roles that few people would ever know existed. Maria's story became a classified case study within the intelligence community about successful long-term undercover operations and the value of placing experienced operatives in positions where they could identify threats while maintaining cover identities that allowed them to gather intelligence without detection. Years later, after Maria had moved on to other assignments that utilized her unique combination of intelligence experience and legal knowledge, the personnel at the Detroit Federal Courthouse would remember her as an example of the hidden expertise that protected American judicial institutions from threats that most people would never know existed. Special Agent Maria Santos had proven that the most effective counterterrorism work was often conducted by those who served without acknowledgement, maintaining cover identities for years while quietly identifying threats and gathering intelligence that protected American lives and institutions from terrorists who sought to exploit the openness of the American legal system. The court interpreter, who had seemed unremarkable to casual observation, had actually been one of the CIA's most experienced Middle Eastern operatives, demonstrating that the most valuable intelligence assets were often hidden among routine government employees, ready to act when their specialized knowledge and experience were needed to prevent threats to national security. Her successful identification of active terrorist coordination in a federal courtroom had shown that intelligence operations could be conducted effectively within the American legal system while maintaining the constitutional protections that defined American justice, proving that national security and civil liberties could be protected simultaneously through the careful application of intelligence capabilities. Agent Santos had answered the call of duty when her expertise was needed, proving that the guardians of American security were often those who appeared to be ordinary government employees, but who actually possessed extraordinary qualifications that could be crucial when standard procedures were insufficient to identify and neutralize threats to public safety and national security.